Hello, Katherine. Thank you for having me on. For those of you unaware, my name is BP McCoppin, independent author. I have an entry in the self-published fantasy blog off number 10. My entry is Record of the Paladins, Book of Oliver. Very briefly, this is a light fantasy novel where it takes place in modern day current world, but demons are real, and there's a group of paladins, modern day crusaders of sorts, who battle these demons. The book covers everything from a youth growing up, discovering his abilities, and the people in this book have angelic powers ranging from super strength to predictive sight and everything in between. So today I'm going to be reading an entry, the first two chapters of this book that introduces two of the main characters. They take place in different time periods, but you'll hear the time periods hop back and forth. And then if there's time, I'll talk about my book number 2 that comes out in a week from Saturday. So without further ado and further pomp and circumstance, I will begin reading the first 2 chapters of Record of the Paladins, Book of Oliver. So I'm reading the actual book, which old school, I prefer that. Chapter 1, Oliver. White. The desert screamed white. The vast, barren waste, so plain, so banal, it could be any desert in any part of the world, spread as far as could be seen in all directions, trailing off into the distant mountains. On the edge of the desert's habitable zone, there rested a chapel overlooking a collection of buildings. To the east, deeper into the dunes and grains, stood the shambles of the rest of the town that appeared overnight and faded over the decades. The desert had almost finished swallowing it and was slowly approaching the chapel. Tallest of the buildings, its bell tower penetrated the sky. The once white paint had been faded by wind and sand over the decades, and it could not be established where this house of God ended and the devouring sand began. Through the desert, a figure approached. A tangle of rags bleached by the sun, wind, and sand covered the figure. It blended into the desert, only distinguishable by movement. It trudged through the dunes, climbing one side, only to tumble down the next. Parts of a sermon could just be heard over the moan of the wind. Words of forgiveness, salvation, and Jesus drifted out and faded into oblivion. The figure placed a wrapped hand on the door and leaned to open it. The wind and sand rushed in and danced along the rows. Grain scratched against the ancient wooden pews. The few parishioners turned to see who had entered. The figure paused and surveyed the room, its features hidden in the shadows of its rags. The minister paused. A chill he had not felt since his youth crawled down his spine, and he could almost hear distant voices. He was tall, athletic man in his early 30s, with a face framed by closely trimmed dark brown hair, the tips just starting to curl, and a short cropped beard. His eyes were a blue so deep that from a distance, folks would say they were the color of onyx. He wore a black duster with a white shoulder yoke, embroidered with a golden cross on his left breast and an outline of a golden dove on his right. His hand slid down, pushing the duster back. "Welcome, friend," his soft, friendly, and distinctly American voice crooned. "All are welcome in this house of God." The figure went rigid at the words. It paused for another moment, seeming lost or confused. "Have you come seeking shelter from the desert?" questioned the minister. "Please, sit, rest. We'll have food and drink, enough for all after the service." He stepped around the pulpit and motioned welcomingly to the pews. The figure began to lumber down the center of the aisle. "God's house." The sound was like a lizard learning to speak the human tongue. The few and scattered parishioners covered their ears. The piercing of the voice was unbearable. The sound raked and tore at their ears. "God is..." The figure's rags burst off his form, and it charged the pulpit screaming, "Dead!" The minister flung aside his coat to draw a pair of revolvers. They screamed to life, and 2 shots cried out as one. The figure dropped to the floor, a hole in its head and a hole in its chest. The prisoners panicked and rushed out the open doors. The minister kept both guns zeroed on the figure as he slowly approached. No blood, no pus, nothing exited the wounds. It was humanoid, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, and the usual stuff. The bullets had torn the rags, exposing the skin beneath. Its skin was like jerky, dry and stretched. It's a ghoul, offered a female voice from one of the rows hidden in shadow. A lesser demon, only able to possess a corpse. A woman slowly rose out of the darkness with her arms raised over her head. She wore a desert robe drawn back to reveal her auburn hair and aquiline features. My name is Melissa. She kept her hands raised as she walked closer. And you are Oliver Donnelly, apprentice of Garin. The moment Melissa spoke the name Garin, Oliver swung one revolver and pointed at her. Yes, I am. My name is posted in the sign outside, said Oliver. Who are you? Was this ghoul here for you? And how do you know about Garin? This ghoul was a servant of a greater demon, answered Melissa. I know much about demons, and even some about you. Garin was your mentor, your adopted father, and your trainer. The weapons you wield were once Garin's. Most importantly, he was a paladin, as are you. Chapter 2. Garin. Oliver was an orphan. He did not remember the orphanage, or much about it in general, but he could recall playing outside, and seasons helped him track the passing years. There were 3 winters for sure, maybe a 4th at the orphanage. A few days Oliver could recall in explicit detail. The day he found a baby bird that had fallen out of the tree by the low rock wall at the far end of the play area. The day he got to have lunch with a young couple as they shopped for a child. The one day Oliver could remember most clearly was his last day at the orphanage, the day he met Garin. Oliver was once again waiting to see the headmaster. He had been playing his favorite playground game, King of the Mountain. From the top of the tiered plate set, when he was not walking down any usurpers, Oliver could see the river that ran down from the mountains to the west. The river flowed past a farm that looked to Oliver how he visualized heaven. He could see the path he would take to go join the family that lived there. He never made the trip. He seldom left the grounds. Oliver almost always won King of the Mountain. It wasn't that he was faster or stronger than the other boys. He could see their movements before they acted and react before they even moved. Even the older and larger boys could rarely get the upper hand. The more Oliver played, the more conclusively he would win, and the more the other boys became emboldened to try and topple him. Oliver's King of the Mountain sessions often resulted in at least one injury. Today's was a broken arm. The school had deemed it cheaper to mend the wounds rather than remove the ancient play device. No one cared if a few orphans had some broken bones now and then. Oliver sat on the faded wooden bench inside the office. The headmaster was talking to a loud man with a peculiar accent. The words "aye" and "lad" and "hooligan" pierced through the time-worn oak door. Oliver would often act out. He did not have any friends at the orphanage. The other children thought him strange, and some of the nuns had begun to believe he was crazy or even demon-possessed. He could sense when people were nearby, even see a ghostly pre-shadow before they would walk into the room. He would sometimes hear voices and could not explain their origin. They would wake him from terrible nightmares full of strange creatures. He did not understand what was happening, and no one could comfort him. That day, there were no unexplained voices. Headmaster Johnson opened the door. "Come in, Oliver." Oliver entered the headmaster's office. There was a man seated at the desk. He wore a wide-brimmed hat over curly hair peppered with gray, brown, and a few strands of red, and his face was covered by the most bedraggled beard that Oliver had ever seen. His eyebrows were full and seemed to extend past his plump nose. "Oliver," said the headmaster, "this is Garen Donnelly. He's going to adopt you." Oliver had expected several whacks in the rear, followed by an earful on how he had once again messed up. Instead, he was being adopted. It was too sudden. What Oliver understood, adoption was a long process where you met the parents and spent time with them to see if you were a compatible fit. This could involve multiple visits and sometimes even spending the weekend at their home. This man was a complete stranger. Garen rose to greet the boy. He was pudgy, of average height, and dressed in a tan overcoat with a green wool sweater underneath and corduroy pants. The clothing seemed odd to Oliver. It was summer. This man seemed dressed for winter. He carried a knobbly walking staff made of faded gray wood. "Greetings, lad. You may call me Garen," said the man. Oliver had no words for the moment. Garen extended a hand and offered it to Oliver, who slowly reached out and took it. "See, lad, but not so hard now," Garen smiled. When he was closer to Garen, Oliver was sure he smelled medicine on him. He had never smelled single-grain Irish whiskey before. Garen turned to the headmaster. "So what's next? Do we have any paperwork? Need my prints for a background check?" He laughed. The headmaster jumped at this. "Oh, no, you can take him now. I've had the head nun already pack his belongings." He did not hide his eagerness for Oliver to leave. The headmaster retrieved the entirety of Oliver's possessions from behind the desk in a small olive green duffel bag tied with twine at the end. He had little trouble lifting it with one hand. Oliver was fixated on the man holding his hand in a large and calloused one. Was this going to be his father? Would he have a mother too, and brothers and sisters? Why would he call him by his name and not Dad? Garen turned to Oliver. "Retrieve your bag, lad. Each carries their own load." Oliver shook his head as if he'd been dreaming. He turned to the headmaster and grabbed his meager belongings. "Don't worry, lad," said Garen in an attempt to cheer the boy up. "Jesus had less and did so much more." Garen could see the boy was out of sorts. He kneeled before him and placed his hands on his shoulders. "I'm going to care for you, give you purpose, and the means to pursue that purpose." Oliver did not understand, but when he looked into the strange man's eyes, he could sense kindness in his gaze. Despite just meeting, Garen cared for him. The newly formed duo said their goodbyes to the staff of the orphanage. When they walked outside, the other children were gathered around a car parked in the loop in front of the orphanage. The 1985 Chrysler LeBaron Town and Country had its top down, and the wood paneling along the side shone in the afternoon sun. Garen opened the door. "Stow your stuff back here, lad. Then sit up front with me." Oliver turned and looked at the orphanage. This building was a place of many sad memories. Children had teased and bullied him. The nuns had ostracized him, and the headmaster savagely beat him. Despite all of this, a twinge of sadness hit him. Despite all the pain and tears he suffered here, this was his home. He had imagined being adopted by a young man and wife. In his daydreams, he had an older brother who would be his best friend, and a younger sister he would protect from the world. The farm he could see from the playground fueled his daydreams of days spent with his family. His brother would fish for him, while his sister picked flowers along the riverbed. He would smell his mother's cooking drifting down the hill. The sounds of his father's hammer working in the shed echoed across the fields. These were happy dreams, dreams that would never come to be. It was not Oliver's fate to be in that family. His fate lay in the care and tutelage of Garen. Well, Katherine, thank you for allowing me to read the first two chapters of Record of the Paladins, Book of Oliver, my self-published fantasy blog off. It's available at the link that Katherine's sharing, Audible, hardback. I even have an audiobook with an actual narrator who I'm sure did a far better job than I did reading my works. As a reminder, a week from Saturday, Book 2 is coming out, Book of Yvonne Ivoire. The story continues at the Paladins as more Paladins are discovered. And also in the works, we have a comic book being released. So beautiful. You can kind of recognize some of the images from chapter 1 in here, the desert and the figure trudging through the desert. So we're excited about what we've got coming for us and what we're working on. And as Katherine said, if you have anything that you want to reach, I've got t-shirts, I've got cups. This is one of the characters carries a shield much like this. His name is Roland. The shield has kind of become the trademark, so to speak. You can see like the number 1 on book 1 has the shield, and number 2 on book 2 and the shield. It's kind of the Paladin trademark, as their chief Paladin, Roland, carries a shield much like this. His armor is engraved with Ephesians 6, which mentions and describes the entire armor of God. So if you have any more you want to know about Record of the Paladins, pick it up at thepaladinbooks.com at the link that Katherine has shared, or you can follow me on Twitter and have more updates for the book. Thank you very much, Katherine.